Hello everybody, how's it going today? Welcome to Ellensburg, Washington, USA. It's a pleasure to have you with us this morning. There's light snow falling outside, very gloomy otherwise outside, but it's nice and warm and cozy here in Discovery Hall on the campus of Central Washington University. The local time is 8:51. And we will begin our program on the Rocky Mountains at 9 o'clock Pacific time. So that's about 9 minutes from now. Of course, if it's a replay that you're watching, you can scrub ahead 9 minutes. Otherwise, we'll say hi to a few folks, and I've got a couple things to do with my laptop, as is the custom lately. So are we doing okay with the lappy microphone and the camera? And we can say hi to just a couple before I got work to do. Hello, Pat. Good morning from Yakima. Therese from the Netherlands. Jack is in Santa Monica. 5x5 says the Geekist. Thank you. In Alabama, Idaho Falls, London. Oh boy, too fast now. Too fast. Hold on. Let me freeze that check. Get it back. Red Deer, Alberta. Victoria, Australia. Hello, Ian. Tucson, Arizona. Jennifer. Lupin. Hello. Dayton, Ohio, I'm scrolling back. Red Lester's in London, Oregon City, Marion, Virginia, Idaho Falls, Santa Monica Pier. Wow, Jack, that's cool. Highway 66, right? Dorset, UK, Penticton, British Columbia, Port Orchard, Washington, Odense, Denmark, another Boise, Idaho, Leamington Spa, UK. No, Leamington Spa, UK. Hello. Czech Republic. Hello. The Netherlands. That's Rutger van Krieken. Michael and family from Ireland. Good to have you guys with us. Massachusetts. Oakland, California. Regine's in France. Kirk's in Sweden. Okay. So Tagish, UK. Cache Creek North. Great. Wonderful. Looks like we're doing okay. Would you give me a second, please? And I got to take care of a little business, and I'll be right back with you. How about that? Oh, should have done this ahead of time. Come on now. Come on now, boy. You got to remember to get yourself ready. Come on. What are you doing? Okay. I think I'm done with my laptop work. Let's say hi to two more and do a few other. Hey, David from Neenah, Wisconsin. Boy, you know the Einersons? Ron Einerson's a cousin of mine. Ron and Dolores. Pamela's in Kamloops, BC. New Mexico, good morning. Oh, shit, what did I just do? Sorry, Patrick. Letha Lee, hello. Jed is here from Superior, Arizona. Nampa, Idaho. Tamara's in Southern California. Lorraine, look at all that chalkboard data. Can't wait. Yeah, I can't wait either. I have a plan. It's a little different than what you might be expecting. Missoula, Montana. Now that's the Rocky Mountains last time I checked, LPJ. Greg's in Tennessee. Grandpa Carl's in Prosser. Granger. John, hello. Yeah, Lissa and Dr. John. Southeast Portland, that's Isaac in the Creston, Kenilworth neighborhood. Trevor's in Nanaimo, BC. Casablanca, oh damn it, Kyle, come on now. He said he's not in Casablanca, Morocco. Don't tease me like that. Ivana, you continue to impress, Ivana. Thank you for being here. Nyon, Switzerland. Hello, Nick. What's up, homie? Shirani in Littleton, Colorado. Okay, we got a few minutes. I think I want to show you the schedule before we start, and then I'll hope to remember to do this at the end. If you saw the last show, you already know this, but let me do this anyway. Come on, boy. There we go. So I'm on the iPad. I'm on this camera. I'm still getting used to this. I don't have Nat here to hold my hand today. I can do it. So a quick programming note before we begin, you early arrivals. Here we are on Saturday, December 4th, and we are about to begin at 9 a.m. Pacific time. I will not see you tomorrow. The next time I see you will be session G, Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific. That's our normal day and time. And we will be starting the Eocene, for sure. But I want to alert you that I'm adding a couple of shows because we are pretty much at the end of the fall term here at CWU. Final exam is next week, and so the building's going to basically be empty for G, H, I, J, K, and L. And if you want to drop by and say hi, I think that's fine. I think that'd be fun. If you just want to come in the building, hang out in the hallway until I'm done here, and then I'll come out and we can visit in the hallway, or we can step outside if you prefer to be outside. But the building's open, Discovery Hall, and if that sounds like a good time for you, that'd be great. We can visit in person if you like. Okay. I'll keep saying that, I guess, but that's a little mention that might be an interesting little twist on things. We'll say hi to a few others, and then we will, I got to get my head right. I got a couple of minutes. And Clint Coast to Coast is here. Hey, man. We got the whole band here. Now, I can't, how many do we have? Oh, I see. 500, over 500? Let me get my screens figured out here. There's always surprises. I'm back to Big Smooth in case you didn't notice. Some of you really liked the tracking camera, but I didn't think the quality was that good. Plus, I felt a little out of control with it. So we're back to Big Smooth, at least for today. Okay, a couple more hellos, and then I need to start concentrating. This one is going to be unusual. Judith is in Skyway, wherever that is. Hi, Judith. Giovanni in the Netherlands. Hi. People saying hi to Clint. That's nice. Susie's in Northern Virginia. Sharon is in Northern California, the Bay Area. Dennis, Gresham, Oregon. Plenty of Oregon people here. It's always nice to see. Maybe the Geological Society of the Oregon Country has something to do with that. Paddock Lake, that's Polly. Purdue, Indiana, Aaron Donaghy's with us. Hi, Aaron. Great to have you here live with us. Dick in the Netherlands, if I remember correctly. Rocky Mountain High, says James. We got a fossil collector from Kentucky. Philomath, Kirk, I'm on it now, baby. I'm not. Olaf, Bern, Switzerland. What up, homie? Clyde Park, Montana. Oh, we got a lot of Rocky Mountain folks. Oh boy, pressure's on. Gracie, age 11. Great to see you again. Hi, Gracie. Thank you for joining us. I got my big boy pants on today. We'll see if it works for you too. That sounded weird. Let's move on. George in Moscow, Idaho. Vancouver, BC. Mr. Tony. Matthias from Chur, Switzerland. We got a bunch of Schweitzers in the house. What's up, homies? All you homies. Matthias was very helpful with the genealogy stuff, you might remember. Okay, I got it. Come on, it's already 9 o'clock. Give me a minute, would you? Give me 1 minute, and we will begin. Thank you for joining us. Hot mic. Hot mic. Woo-hoo. I guess I'm going to talk to myself here for just a second. Come on, boy, you can do this. You can do this. We're just playing with it. Listen, if you hate this show, you got to blame Basil. I blame Basil. Copy mark. Oh, jeez, not a good sign. Copyright, trademark. Okay, come on, get your head right. You can do it. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Ellensburg, Washington, USA, which I do not think is in the Rocky Mountains. Ellensburg, Washington is here. And yet we are talking about the Rocky Mountains today. Saturday only at the Bon Marché. This is only a one-day event. And you're like, well, that sounds impossible. I don't know how in the hell you're going to talk about the Rocky Mountains in one day. I mean, if I Google Rocky Mountains, this is you talking, if I Google Rocky Mountains, they give me all sorts of different ages for when the Rockies were constructed. Like, what's the story? What's the answer? It's a work in progress, and I have a couple things up my sleeve that are very unusual today. So I hope it works. I hope you're willing to just kind of, first of all, just get something in your mind that this will be unusual compared to the other shows. So this is an Eocene series from A to Z, and this is session F, the 6th show. Now, I didn't plan it this way, but last fall when we did the exotic terrains A to Z, and we were talking about the fruitcake out here in the far west, I had 6 table setting episodes, as I was calling them. And then we finally launched into the exotic terrains. Again, this is an accident, but this is our 6th show in this series, the Crazy Eocene A to Z. And those are the 6, this is the last of the table setting episodes to get ready for the Crazy Eocene here in the Pacific Northwest. So this will be a departure, obviously, for us, not only in format, but in content, but have no fear. If you've been waiting for the Eocene with bated breath, stupid phrase, we're going there starting the next time I see you, which will be Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific time, next Wednesday. Okay, so what's the unusual part? Well, I got all sorts of crazy stuff planned, no pun intended. But before I launch into that, let's do some basic things first of all. It is still puzzling to even geologists who've spent most of their career studying Rocky Mountain geology exactly when the Rocky Mountains began and when the Rocky Mountains shut off. And let's be clear to everybody, especially people in distant lands, where are these Rocky Mountains and are they still building? The answer is no, they're not still building. Notice that there's a shut-off date for the building of the Rocky Mountains with all these dates. And you're like, well, hold on, the Tetons, I read that the Tetons just south of Yellowstone are still growing. Well, they are, but that's not classic Rocky Mountain geology. So I'm not going to go through a huge laundry list, but there are places in the Rocky Mountains that you think of as the Rocky Mountains that have nothing to do with our discussion today. Yellowstone, that's in the Rockies. Yellowstone's too young. That's a supervolcano story. That does not apply today. Basically, when we get to our live questions for me and our guest, I might just go, nope, I'm sorry, not our topic today. Grand Tetons, the Teton Fault, that's a basin and range structure. That's too young. That's not the issue as well. So we're focusing on these 2 styles of structural geology mountain building for the Rocky Mountains. Now, I've used the Laramide orogeny as a substitute for building the Rockies for the first 15 years of my teaching career. I barely remember about the Sevier orogeny and what the difference is between the Sevier and the Laramide, so let's just try to be descriptive. And again, for people watching from other continents and you're not really clear where the Rockies are, or I guess for people in the U.S. who aren't really technically clear where the Rocky Mountains are, actually the Rocky Mountains are here. You recognize these states and provinces? We're talking about eastern BC and Alberta in Canada. We're talking about the mountains collectively with the Rocky Mountains today. Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, half of Utah, portions of Idaho, even down into northern New Mexico. That is the Rocky Mountains. Out here where I live, and the fruitcake and the exotic terrains, that's not Rocky Mountains at all. So I don't live in the Rocky Mountains, and yet I have the cojones to talk about the Rocky Mountains. How's that possible? Well, we'll see in a second. Now, there is just a visual difference between two structural styles in the Rocky Mountains. And there's debate among the geologists about when the Sevier mountain building happened compared to the Laramide. And we'll see that there's even some overlap in style, architecture, geometry, and even timing. But the visual that I want you to have before we start and get into some nitty-gritty is that you see this dashed line here. So pretty much everything here is the Rocky Mountains. But I have a dashed line approximately drawn in here, obviously. And I have the dashed line here. So this style of building Rocky Mountains, Sevier Style, is taking pizza boxes, thrust sheets, that's a concept familiar to us, and that's happening in here. I don't want to muddy up my map here, but this is the Sevier fold and thrust belt. Flats and ramps and all sorts of structurals not involving the basement that much, the craton, in other words, of North America, but shoving these thrust sheets eastward, sometimes tens of miles eastward, tens of kilometers eastward. On the other side of this dashed line, especially in the U.S., there's a different style of building the Rockies called the Laramide Style or the Laramide orogeny. Generally, this is a little bit younger than the Sevier, but again, we have overlap. But I'm talking about the Front Range of the Colorado Rockies or the Wind River Range or some of these uplifts in Montana. And they're built like this. Also on a fault, there's faults associated. These are steeper reverse faults generally. And we have these kind of uplifting pigs shaking these layers of jello that are clinging to their flanks away. So many of the high points in the Colorado Rockies, for instance, were built like this, where the basement is involved and we uplift in a more vertical sense as opposed to a horizontal sense. But we can get lost in the weeds within this difference between those two styles and the timing and everything else, but I'm hoping eventually through a guest that we have today to get a little bit more into that because I am not the expert. The Rockies are dead according to these styles, and we're not having these faults be active anymore. And which time frame do we want to pick for the building of the Rocky Mountains? That's part of my loose plan. But please note, this is a squeezing story. There's no getting around that. We're building the Rocky Mountains because we are compressing the crust and making thrust faults and or reverse faults and uplifting the Rockies somewhere in this time. Take your pick, which time window you want. So that's the Rockies. That's what the Rockies are today and where the Rockies are today and a little bit of how we've built the Rocky Mountains. We good? Okay. Now, I had lunch yesterday, Friday, and I'm like, oh, this is a good peanut butter and jelly sandwich. What am I going to do tomorrow? How am I going to do all this? And I came up with an idea that I want to use. And I want to do a story with you. I want to tell you a story. And I'm going to be part of the story. And you're like, I've been waiting for you to talk about the Rocky Mountains for 2 years. I'm watching this from Boulder, Colorado, and you're going to waste time talking about yourself? Yes. So let me tell you why I'm going to sleep okay tonight, I think. I'm going to tell a story, and I'm going to talk about the Rockies basically from 30,000 feet looking down. In other words, big picture, broad strokes. But the reason I'm going to feel okay tonight, go to the iPad please, is I want you to go right now, I want you to remember that you can go to this website called nickzentner.com. nickzentner.com. Enter the promo code, just kidding. Enter the promo code, sorry Patrick. No, it's all free. This is obviously a shrine to myself. But if we go down here and click on Eocene, click on Eocene, boy, spladam. I went nutso last night. You know what a baker's dozen is? I got 13 papers for you with all sorts of detail, all sorts of weeds, the deep end of the pool. And each of these is clickable, starting with the Bill Dickinson, Walt Snyder paper from 1987. And we're going to discuss this tectonic model. Let me scroll. Close your eyes if this makes you sick. Let me come down to a very key diagram. Okay, there we go. So in 1987, Bill Dickinson from Stanford University and Walt Snyder from Stanford University at the time came up with this model called flat slab subduction, responsible for both the Sevier and the Laramide styles of mountain building. Flat slab subduction. But it's not just that paper. Oh boy, how do we get out of this? Come on now. How do I get back to... You're wasting time, boy. Yeah. So I got to figure out how to keep going back. But my point is that I am going to tell a story involving the concept of flat slab. These are my labels, obviously. End load. Some of you who watched earlier shows in the series kind of know where I'm going with this. Oh my God, a blast from last fall, westward subduction versus eastward subduction. It's all part of this grand drama. So those papers are waiting for you. Maybe you can put it off till the end of this lecture to start reading them. But that content is there. And the gimmick of this lecture is my story. Hopefully will have you see kind of a grand narrative. And as you drill down into those individual papers or read some other things online, you'll know kind of how it fits into the grand scheme. That's the plan. Let's do it. He gets rid of this board. So it's story time. And I wasn't going to say this, but I think I am. If you like the style that I have, the teaching style that I have, it's a direct result of my mom and my dad. And you're like, well, of course it is. But let me be specific about it. My mom was an excellent storyteller. She still is. She can take a 10-minute drive to the bank and back and have a 25-minute story for my dad and I sitting at the kitchen table. Just mundane, everyday stuff, but she would have a beginning, a middle, and end. There's some drama, there's a surprise, whatever. And, my dad would sometimes say, Mary, you did it again. You came up with a story out of essentially nothing. And she had a talent for that. And so if you like the storytelling part of what we do here, that's my mom. My dad was a farmer and a teacher and a vice principal and a county board person and everything else. So he was involved in the community and was connected to a lot of different kinds of people. But he was an original guy. He was not a slave to the fashions of the day. Even as a teenager, and my dad was at the high school, and he was a high school football coach, and everybody had the sideburns and the cool coaching shorts and everything. I'm like, Dad, would you please dress like everybody else? This is humiliating. He's like, no, we're good. Fashion goes in cycles, I'll become hip one day. So he was always curious and reading and deeply interested in a lot of things. But he always kind of wondered, are we sure that company line that I keep hearing is accurate? Like I would come home from grad school in Idaho, and I'd say, yeah, Dad, let me tell you about the Rocky Mountains. I learned all this great stuff. Flat slab subduction for the Rocky Mountains. He's like, oh, what's that? Tell me about that. I said, well, the Rocky Mountains developed because there was this eastward subducting Farallon plate, and it was steeply dipping for a time, Dad, and so there were volcanoes in California, and then those volcanoes shut off. And then further inland, like 1,000 miles inland from the west coast, steeply dipping Farallon plate, I'm sure I didn't stutter like that when I talked to him. The subducting angle of the Farallon plate would shallow out. And when there was flat slab or low angle subduction of the Farallon plate, that's why the Rockies grew. And my dad would go, well, who came up with that? That sounds kind of weird. I said, well, Bill Dickinson from Stanford University. Now, most people would go, oh, Stanford University, okay, well, that's the best of the best. But we're talking about a story happening in the Midwest. And in the Midwest, everybody's equal. If somebody's wealthy, they downplay it. If somebody's super famous, they downplay it. Everybody's equal. So that didn't faze my dad at all. Okay, Stanford, yeah. How many people are saying this flat slab thing? I'm like, everybody, Dad, everybody. Everybody's saying flat slab subduction built the Rockies. I'd get like agitated. He's like, what's the data for that? Are we sure that's right? That just doesn't sound right to me. So he would do it with a twinkle in his eye, but he was an original thinker. And so we're approaching this lecture in that vein. A little bit of Mom, a little bit of Dad. Are we sure this style, this story, is still the way to go? So let me give you flat slab subduction as the reason for the Rockies, which is the conventional story. And let me also share with you a new set of ideas called end-load collision. Quickly, here we go. We're trying to explain the Sevier and the Laramide and the timing and everything, and this is happening so far away from an active plate boundary, it's a puzzle. So, Dickinson from Stanford says this in the mid-1980s. Okay, we've got North America. This is a cross-section. It's drifting west. And yes, for a time, we have a steeply dipping Farallon plate off the coast of California. He's teaching at Stanford. California, the apex of the universe. And there's the California Triad, a subduction complex, the Franciscan complex, the Great Valley, and then there's a volcanic arc. Now, today, the Sierra Nevada mountains. There aren't any volcanoes today, Dad, in eastern California, but there used to be when we had subduction of a steeply dipping Farallon plate. Well, the Rockies are further inland than that. Denver's over here. So the flat slab subduction model to build the Rockies says this. When the volcanoes in eastern California shut off, that must mean that the subducting Farallon plate that is subducting eastward, we're talking about the majority opinion, that's all over the internet, all over the textbooks. Hard Road West, Keith, Heyer, Meldal. What's he got for us? I don't care what kind of book you're looking at. I don't care what kind of magazine you're reading. I don't care what kind of YouTube channel you're talking about. It's this flat slab subduction that is the common story. So let me finish my train of thought. We got to build the Rockies over here by that stick person. We got to do a bunch of severe folds and thrusts, the pizza boxes. We got a little bit further east, we've got to develop these, higher angle reverse faults. These aren't volcanoes. This is a compressional story 1,000 miles away from the active plate boundary. And Dickinson says it's pretty simple. You just change the angle of the Farallon plate. You always subduct the Farallon plate eastward. That's this model says. always like the Andes, always Andean, always have eastward subduction of the Farallon plate, and this active subduction of a low angle or a flat slab right underneath the base of North America is going to fuel the building of the Rocky Mountains. Then you eventually kind of roll this thing back, and the Rockies are dead. Are you sure? That just doesn't sound right to me. What's the data for that? Tell me that again. I'm just slow. It's my dad talking. Okay, well, I'm part of this story because I'm a product of Stanford University, even though I never went there. iPad, wake up. Keynote. All right, sorry Mom, you're watching. You don't want this to happen, but it's happening anyway. So there's the storyteller on the left, that's my mom. There's the skeptic on the right, the twinkle in his eye skeptic on the right, my dad. Mom on the left, dad on the right. Okay, I think we've got it now. Okay. So how am I a product of Stanford? I never went there. Well, this was my advisor in Pocatello, Idaho. Dave Rogers. He was an Elizabeth Miller student. He was still finishing up his PhD. He was like 2 years older than I was. This is a photo taken in central Idaho in probably 1987. And outside of my parents, this guy Dave Rogers is the most important person to shape who I am as a teacher and as a person who loves geology. Without saying it out loud, he was teaching me the Stanford way. Let's continue the story. Oh, but there's more than Dave Rogers. There's Walt Snyder, who co-wrote the flat slab paper with, I assume, his former advisor, Bill Dickinson at Stanford. So I have intimate connection with Snyder as well, also from Stanford. What's the connection? This guy, Walt Snyder, was at Boise State at the time. And you remember those old cars? My first car was a Toyota Tercel. There was only 2 doors. It was the cheapest possible model I could get. My parents bought it for me for $6,000 for college graduation from the University of Wisconsin. And I drove that brand new car out west to go to grad school. Well, do you remember those cars? To get into those back seats of those tiny little Tercels, you had to, it's a 2-door, so you got to like bring the seat way up to the steering wheel and then tilt it forward, and then somebody's got to do some sort of yoga to get into the back seat. Well, I was visiting Boise with a bunch of my grad student buddies, and guess who joined us for beer and lunch? Walt Snyder. And we knew he was a big deal. I didn't really know the significance of his big dealness. But there's Walt Snyder trying to fold himself into the back seat of my Tercel as I'm driving us to someplace in downtown Boise. And I have told this story many times in other forms. I'll tell it right now. You know, I'm driving and I'm like looking in my rearview mirror at Walt, you know, in the back there, clenched in, you know. I say, Walt, this must be an exciting time for you. You're at a university, you've got a research program here and grad students, and this must be like the apex of your career to this point. And he shut me down immediately and he said, no, this is nothing. My best days were in grad school. You guys are in grad school right now. It's pure. You're doing nothing but eating and sleeping and learning geology. Think about how much new stuff you guys are learning every day. And we're like, oh my God, really? This is it? I thought we were like building towards something 10 years from now. Walt Snyder, crammed in the back of my little Toyota Tercel, the guy who authored Flat Slab Subduction less than 10 years earlier, had these words of wisdom that I repeat. And before I forget, I'm eventually going to tell a story that has 2 sides to it. And I don't want to go good guys and bad guys. We don't need that, do we? We don't need good guys and bad guys in the world. Everything's so extreme right now anyway. So the truth of all this building the Rocky Mountains is some sort of shade of gray between black and white. And I'm a shade of gray between the Stanford training and where I'm heading lately with Basil Tikoff, Darrel Cowan, and others. And you'll see what I mean. That's where we're headed. Okay, back to the story. So there's Walt trying to, come on now, boy. There's Walt trying, you can't see him, but Walt's trying to get into my Darrell. Okay. So because of Rogers, my advisor, I decided I want to teach at a school without a PhD. I have a master's. And so Rogers calls his former buddy, Megan Miller, who had just arrived in Ellensburg at CWU. So there's another Stanford connection. Megan Miller hired me to start here in 1992. And where did I start teaching a field camp? Well, of course, we went down to the Eastern California, Owens Valley, and we basically ripped off the field course that Joe Roots has been teaching at Stanford forever. Are you starting to hear my point? I've been surrounded by people from fricking Stanford University my entire career, ever since I met Dave Rogers in 1986. Here I am teaching Geology 210, yes, in California with Ann Egger. I've worked with Wendy Borson, Stanford. Chris Mattinson, right upstairs, Stanford. Carrie Gazes, Stanford. Jeff Lee, Stanford. Oh, you want some diversity? Well, sure. We got people from Caltech. This is the Los Angeles area. Charlie Rubin, who I taught with for 20 years. Craig Scrivener, Tim Melbourne, Caltech. So I've heard about Stanford and Caltech for the last 30 years. Every faculty meeting here in frickin' Ellensburg, Washington, I'm hearing about Stanford. And so when it's time to teach a field course, I'm like, Charlie, shouldn't we do something with the Stewarts? How about Central Washington? He says, no, let's go down to California. Let's go down to California. California-centric. They're not the bad guys in the story, but because of that personal history, I'm telling you that I was, without even knowing it, that's how these cults work, you know. I was drinking the Kool-Aid, I didn't even know it. I was teaching flat slab subduction. I was teaching field courses in California and focusing on the Sierra Nevada mountains. And at the same time, I was ignoring Baja, BC. I was ignoring the Stewart Range. I was ignoring Washington geology pretty much 100% through the 1990s and even much of the 2000s. So to review, Bill Dickinson and Walt Snyder from Stanford University have the company line. They have the majority opinion. You have a constant eastward subducting Farallon plate that not only explains California geology, it explains the Rocky Mountains. Just by playing with it, just by playing with the angle of the subducting Farallon plate. And so you're a fixist by nature. If somebody talks about Baja, BC, you're not interested because it doesn't help the California storyline, the California thinking. And just one little coda on this before we get to what I'm going to try to help us explore. At Idaho State, not only was there Dave Rogers from Stanford, there was Paul Link and my classmate Brian Mahoney, who to this day are severely anti-Baja, BC. And Idaho State is a very important place to me, don't get me wrong. Those people are wonderful, and again, you've already heard from me that I owe much of what I do to Idaho State University. But I was being taught that Merle Beck was a paleo magician. Let's talk about the Paleo Mag in 1986. They're paleo magicians. And I didn't quite have this all connected, that you're not going to be into Baja, BC if you are invested in not only flat slab subduction, but a more fixist view of things. Okay, the last portion of what we're doing, we're already to the end of the story, is what happened a week and a half ago. Did you see the show right before Thanksgiving when Basil Tikoff from the University of Wisconsin showed up? Here, with us. And that was a mind-blowing appearance for many reasons. And I knew parts of it, but I didn't totally have it figured out until some email help and some other things put things all together for me. So, what is it's not even a debate, that's the point. If you're from Stanford, everything works perfectly. There is nobody else to talk to about this. So the minority opinion is this end load collision story that involves, yes, exotic terrains. Let's do it real quick. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to have to do the Sevier and the Laramide uplifts during this time window that we're talking about, which we know we're talking about building the Rockies in here, right? Is it 100 to 50? Is it 80 to 30? I mean, we're approaching the Eocene with this discussion of some of the stuff, but so frickin' far away. So instead of this, Basil, Tikoff, and others are saying, we had a huge exotic terrain offshore. You have to admit that there's exotic terrains happening offshore. And can we admit that maybe there is a severe trauma happening inland with the Rocky Mountains even, if we bring this insular terrain to it and dock it and hit it? Kapow! Hit and run. The whole deal. Fireworks. So this is a different idea than this. We're not going to have a continuous eastward subduction of this ocean floor. I mean, we could have some eastward subduction as North America gets closer and closer to insular, or insular gets closer and closer to North America. Or, if you recall, what I was hitting very hard last winter, and I haven't spoken a lick of it this winter, is that Karin Siglock and Mitch Mahalinik, do you remember those names from a year ago? They were emphasizing, based on their tomography, their evidence down in the mantle, is that perhaps insular was stationary, and that we closed this ocean between North America and the insular superterrane by having westward subduction. The point is, regardless of what kind of angle of subduction you have, we are going to hit. We're going to load the end of North America, the west end of North America, by the accretion of the insular superterrane. Yes, that's Rangeli and friends. Yes, that's what we've been doing the last few letters in the alphabet before this show. And that we're going to do the same Sevier and Laramide uplifts, not because of a flat slab Farallon plate subduction, but instead we're going to have this Cretaceous hit that causes a chain reaction of events further inland. And what goes with this set of ideas again, I'm telling a story. Thanks, Mom. I'm telling a story. I need the two end members of the story to tell a decent story. The truth is probably somewhere in between these two, but you're hearing what I'm trying to do, I hope. So if we go down to this minority opinion, we put Basil in this group. That's the new paper coming out. The lunatic fringe, as Basil said by email last time. We might have some westward and we might have some eastward. The geophysics has been done now. There is no obvious slab geophysically that's underneath North America that shows this steady subduction of this flat. Where's the flat slab? Are we sure this is right? I know you keep hearing flat slab subduction, says my dad, but are we just being a parrot here? Are we just mimicry? Rocky Mountains, flat slab subduction. Well, Where is that slab? There's no evidence for it, according to Karn and Mitch. And if you really want to get to the lunatic fringe, how about you settle down with a little bit of Bob Hildebrand? Amazing maps, amazing stories, way out on the lunatic fringe. And yes, we're going to lump Murrow and Darrell and the Paleomag and the Mobilist and the 1,500 miles of movement from Mexico to British Columbia. I'm not saying everybody's totally making this connection between the Rockies and Baja, BC, but I am saying that that's kind of the way to frame this. Whew! We go to Patty the iPad one more time, and then we're going to go to our guest. Hotkey. Done with photos of my parents. My mom will be relieved to see that. Here's a few selected, just a few couple selected images for you. So this is from the Stanford paper, the original, 1987. Bill Dickinson. Warren Hamilton plays a role in this, but I don't know that role. And Walt, the guy crumpled in my back seat of my Tercel. Flat slab is down here. So the angle used to be steep, and now it's flat, and we have the Rockies growing. But there's plenty of the Baker's dozen papers. Here's Gene Humphreys in Eugene, Oregon, 10 years ago, talking about Laramide orogeny and geophysics supporting the shallow flat slab or low-angle slab Farallon plate. And Gene's helping us see that we not only have the pizza boxes that are severe, we've got the Colorado Plateau involved in this. So now we're uplifting the plateau, total of mystery to me, and then some Laramide uplifts further east. Sorry. Here's Bob Hildebrand, or Rob Hildebrand, I can't decide which it is. I love his maps among some of his ideas. And in blue here is our, look at all those thrust faults. Look at all those thrust faults that are Sevier style. And then over here, each of these is a basin, but next door to the basin are some of these Laramide uplifts where the basement is involved. And this is, I think, a Tanya Atwater animation that's on a loop. Please ignore the dates in the lower left because she's talking about the Himalayas. This is an animation showing, why is it choppy? She's showing an animation of India coming in from the left, moving north in other words, and colliding with Asia, a continent versus continent collision. And notice that we have a slab failure, and we don't have ongoing shallow subduction of an ocean plate in this model. Well, if you ignore the dates in the lower left, and you ignore the fact we're looking at India colliding with Asia, this kind of works for what Basil and friends are talking about. What's coming in from the left? It's not India, it's the insular superterrane, Rangelia and friends. And whether you want Rangelia and friends to be stationary or moving like this, are the Rockies a result of loading the west end of North America? Now, before we go to our guest, let's say that you're not totally getting what I'm doing here, number one, and it just feels like a bunch of wasted time. I hope you can see what I'm doing. I'm reminding you of what I just tried to do, to give you a general narrative over the last 50 years, to get a sense that not everybody is still agreeing that flat slab subduction is the explanation for the Rocky Mountains. Most say still. But there's a growing number of folks, it's not really a revolution, but there's a growing number of folks who are saying, I don't think our data that we have now fully supports this 50-year-old idea, 40-year-old idea. But again, I remind you that you have these papers waiting for you that are pro and con flat slab versus a revolt. I'm going to read you one email before we go to our guest. The guest is like, just come on, what are you doing? I'm waiting. Basil's the inspiration for this episode. I blame Basil, copyright, trademark. Let me reread and expand a little bit on what Basil wrote last week to me and a few other geologists by email. You've heard some of this before. Hi, Nick and others. I think that I should be clear that I am one of the few people who tie the Rocky Mountain Formation to the insular collision. Certainly it is consensus in the geological community today that flat slab subduction exists and caused the Rocky Mountains. So Nick, I think you might need to appreciate that you are out on the lunatic fringe if you suggest otherwise. The flat slab model is inconsistent with westward subduction as well. So I suppose that Rob Hildebrand and Scott Johnson might also agree. So since I think I started this mess, that's Basil, let me tell you what I know. And so this right now I'm going to read to you quickly, but it may not make sense until you look at a few of those papers in the Baker's Dozen. Barbara Carapa, you'll see the paper, and colleagues show exhumation in southwestern Montana starting at 100 million years ago. 100, the big hit. This is based on low temperature thermal chronology, and they attribute exhumation to uplift and erosion. They note that the timing is dead-on consistent with the western Idaho shear zone, but they still insist on the block uplifts happening due to flat slab subduction. That is, their preferred hypothesis is that flat slab subduction initiates offshore of Idaho at 100 million years ago because block uplift equals flat slab subduction. They're just working in that paradigm. The problems are that there is still an arc, a volcanic arc in Idaho, and the insular terrain is offshore by anyone's reckoning. I cleared with Basil that I could read this to you, by the way, even though he's just emailing to me privately. Garber, the Garber paper that you'll see in the Baker's Dozen, points out that there's uplift definitely at 87 million years ago in southwest Montana, and they recognize that it is a problem with shallow slab subduction. They also do not consider what is going on offshore. In fact, a problem with all these models, even today, is that everyone in the Rockies looks at the California margin for their model of a plate boundary. This barely works for Wyoming and doesn't work at all for southwest Montana. It's behind the Idaho plate boundary, and there is no getting around that. Remember, Basil's an expert in western Idaho, and he's been there for 25 years. Oh, he talks about the Streitman paper. Let's move on. He talks about the Shatsky rise and basically says the single largest problem with the Shatsky rise, this is Basil, is that it simply may not exist. It has always been a hypothesis rather than a proven entity. He talks about Paul Umhofer, Baja, BC, but here's the last thing I want to share with you. This is Basil still. That said, I don't think the shallow slab model is consistent with the data from the Cordillera. But you are not, Nick. You're not going to find papers that compare terrain collision to shallow slab subduction because most people do not accept the terrain collision as even a possibility. All the work we are currently doing is just to try to get people to admit that the Baja BC thing is a possibility and that it is permissive that it caused an effect on North America. Nick, this is the way that science works. Most tectonic models are discarded by inattention, not by active rejection. At some point, enough people maybe will say, wait, there really is a problem here. So it seems that your lectures have an interesting opportunity to lift up the curtain and show how science is actually done. You have a good handle on your audience and to determine whether that's of interest or not. It might be just simpler to just move on to the Eocene, which is plenty complicated. Good luck, Basil. All right. So I'm going to keep this here. And you have those papers, but you're like, I'm not going to read the papers, man. I tuned in to learn more about Rocky Mountain geology. Well, I have a guest. And your host is remembering to put his headphones on this time. and we'll see if we can bring him in without much problem. And this gentleman is the author of the new edition of Roadside Geology of Montana. His name is Rob Thomas. And Rob has been teaching for a long time. He's my vintage at Montana Western in Dillon, Montana. So, excellent book. I've just gotten started on this, Rob, but I really enjoy it. And at some point I thought I was going to use your book a lot in this lecture, but I decided I'd do this approach instead. So, without further ado, let's try to get Rob on here. Rob Thomas, how are you today?
Good.
Thank you for joining us. Oh, you're looking sharp. Look at that. And you're in your office, it looks like.
I am.
Okay. Well, I can hear you fine, and I'll just assume that they can hear you as well. So we're just going to roll. So you teach a lot in the field right there in southwest Montana.
Yeah.
Can you give us a sense of some local examples of both the Sevier and the Laramide styles that are in your radius?
Yes. So, I started teaching field camps here with Bob Weidman at the University of Montana in Missoula in 1986, and continued on through UW where I did my PhD work with Darrell and Paul M. Hoffer and several others, and continue now using our block scheduling system here at Western, teaching students in structural geology through field mapping. And in a nutshell, I think people should recognize that what many of us were taught is the Sevier and Laramide orogenies. Those are terms that really probably are not they're not applicable. We should refer, as you did, to the Laramide and or the Sevier and the Laramide styles, because they're really just different styles of structural compression within a period of time that overlaps both in time and space between these two different kinds of compression. So, Sevier. The Sevier, the starting point on the Sevier is something that, you talked about and is, certainly worth a lot of debate. In this part of the world, it's definitely in Jurassic time. The Jurassic Morrison Formation is a fluvial deposit with some, lakes and swamps that accumulated coal. And those fluvial deposits are very clearly derived from the west, and the streams were flowing to the east. And so for the first time following the Paleozoic and the earliest Mesozoic with what we call the Triassic Dinwiddie Formation, we see a transition out of the Jurassic Ellis group, which is marine, into the Morrison Formation, which is non-marine, and of course famous for its Jurassic dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And we've got those here in Dillon. We have a bunch of baby sauropod fossils in the Morrison here in the Dillon area, and those streams are definitely coming off a topography to the west. So they're, for the first time, following the Paleozoic. Mm-hmm. So that to me is, the indicator that there is collision and topographic relief being generated to the west. What it did is it began a progression of taking that stack of sedimentary rock, which was basically, just a bunch of flat layers of sandstones and limestones and clay stones and siltstones, and it started shoving them east like a deck of cards.
Yeah. And
those above the basement. So the basement, which is a term that I use reluctantly because there's, of course, this incredible wealth of information about the Earth in the basement,
Right.
in particular the Archean and the earliest Proterozoic. But from the belt rocks up, which is Mesoproterozoic, you get this big stack of sedimentary rock sitting on top of the basement. Those rocks were shoved east to west, in many cases up to 100 miles, and a little bit more up in the northwestern part of Montana, a little less to the southwest part of Montana, about half of what it is up in the north west part of the state. And those big slabs moving along, décollements, flat faults, as they proceeded, they had, they would hit points where they couldn't propagate eastward any longer, and they would rise up. That's a ramp, until they could find a way to propagate forward again, and then they would flat again. And so this is how we get older rocks on top of younger rocks in the thin-skinned fold and thrust belt, which is the Sevier Style.
So just outside of Dillon, you can see some of these thrust faults, like within 30 miles of campus?
Oh, yeah. If I got on top of the building, I could see them from my building.
Have each of those thrust faults been named? What are a couple of the names of the lower?
Oh yeah, some are named, and there's a zillion of them, right? You can't name them all.
Right.
One of the most famous in the area is called the Sandy Hollow Thrust, and the Sandy Hollow Thrust is north of the Big Hole River. Many of your your viewers probably went to field camp in the Dillon area if they're geologists, and mapped what's called the Rat's Nest. And the Rat's Nest is a place north of the Big Hole River in what we call Sandy Hollow, or Block Mountain. It's got a zillion names. And the Rat's Nest is just simply a place where there's a ramp in a fault, and that ramp had a hard time ramping, and as a result it broke into a bunch of slices. And it may be that it's a duplex structure. It may just be imbricate thrusting. The top is gone, so it's not possible to really be absolutely certain. But it drives students crazy because it's a small area and there's a zillion faults that they have to map. So,
but no Laramide in that mapping area. So the Laramide.
Okay, it's a great question.
Yeah.
So all I got to do is get into the SUV and drive down the road about 5 miles.
Oh my God.
And there's the basement. And so there are these blocks of schist and gneiss. They're in the book, and those blocks of schist and gneiss they were clearly rising at the time that the thin-skinned slabs of sedimentary rock were moving across the basement. So as they're moving across the basement's rising at the same time, and they hit the basement. And what it does is it takes and it crumples the thrust faults. So we see folding of the thrust faults themselves.
Oh, wow.
And we see that they have been shoved back to the west, so that rather than propagating east, they propagate west because they can't propagate east. They ran into a backstop or a wall of more homogeneous metamorphic rock, and they couldn't get through it. So we have crystal clear evidence that the Sevier and Laramide styles of structure overlapped both in time and in space. And we have a good date on this as well, because the folded rocks are riddled with sills. And the sills came from the igneous rocks that were being intruded into the fold and thrust belt in southwest Montana. And we now know that many of these intrusions came into the structures, so that they would run up the ramps, get to the flat on the top of the ramp, and then bulge up almost like a laccolith, filling the top of the ramp with magma. And so, so
the magma's taking advantage of the crack. The magma's coming up. I see.
Yeah, and the guy that really deserves the credit for that is Tom Calicay. He's at Rocky Mountain College over in Billings, and he did his PhD work at Wyoming on this fault and placement of igneous rocks. in southwest Montana. I'm just borrowing Tom's good work.
Nice.
But those intrusions, they sent off sills into the fold and thrust belt, and then where the sills are folded, we can then date the sill, and we know, it gives us a timing on the folding, right? So those sills are really, well dated at 72 million years. And so we know that at 72 million years, these igneous intrusions came in, and then they were folded sometime after that. And so, where's the upper end?
Right.
Well, the upper end is the tertiary, the Eocene, volcanic rocks, which are not folded. So Block Mountain, for those that know this area, is a basaltic lava flow that sits on top of the fold and thrust belt and is not itself folded or thrust faulted. And it's got a very solid 46 million year age date on it. So there's the bracket.
Yeah.
But it's very likely that the folding occurred shortly after 72 million years when the sill came in.
Well, I'll tell you, this is exactly what I was hoping for. So you're knocking it out of the park here, Rob. Thank you for that.
You bet.
I've got like 72 more questions, but you and I can talk off camera. I think what we'll do is, can I put you in the green room for a second? I've got another guest I want to bring on for just a second. You know who I'm bringing in.
Yep.
And we'll tap into the story I was telling. And then, can you hang around for a few more minutes? We'll bring you back when we do some live.
The whole show.
So those that want to ask more detailed questions of you, that would be wonderful. So great job. Thank you. We'll see you in just a second. Oh, boy. Well, we have Darrel Cowan. How are we doing on the audio there, Darrell?
I hear you great. How about me? Okay.
You're doing wonderful.
You say 5 by 5, I think that's
5. Oh, see, you're a veteran now. So these guys in the live chat, they all get a chance to meet you for the first time. And of course, we have an author with us now of this book, the second edition. So both these guys, Darrell and Rob, are not only authors, but are longtime professors. And so we have our second guest in here in the same show. Now, you don't live in the Rockies, Darrell. You don't do work in the Rockies, but you do have a very personal intersection with this story I was telling today about Stanford and Bill Dickinson himself. So what's your relationship with Bill Dickinson?
Well, yeah, that's, I'll kind of tell my little story. I got both a bachelor's degree and a PhD from Stanford. And Bill Dickinson was my supervisor, my PhD supervisor. And I did my research in the Franciscan Subduction complex in California. And while I was a graduate student, plate tectonics, geologists understood the meaning of plate tectonics. And so I was kind of raised, or I graduated on the idea that in California we have a beautiful record of subduction along the North American margin. The Sierra Nevada batholith is the arc. Great Valley Group is the Four-Arc Basin, and the Franciscan is the subduction complex. So that kind of set my thinking. I'm a West Coast guy. I actually have taught in Dillon, but I'm a West Coast. I'm a Californian. and I might also say that you mentioned something that and how did I get into this whole exotic terrain business?
Yeah.
Maybe that'd be interesting. So when I moved to Seattle, my first rock experience, I look at rocks. My first rock experience was in the San Juan Islands. And we were developing the idea of your pizza boxes, that there were thrust slabs that were juxtaposed. And what really struck me, we're talking late 70s, maybe 1980. Where did these rocks come from? And I knew a little bit about rocks to the south in the Klamath and California. And I saw rock units that looked very familiar, like the Shuxon, very similar to parts of the Franciscan or the Conry Mountain schist. what we call the Fidalgo ophiolite and its sedimentary cover. I was thinking Great Valley Group. I mean, we see that in California. The pillow basalts with these exotic Tethyan foraminifera called fusulinids, Klamath Mountains, Western Sierras. And the other thing that struck me is when you look north, you don't see any of these rock units. Maybe Cache Creek, but that's a little bit different. So I thought these things had a southern homeland. That's a good idea. Where did they come from? Mm-hmm. Where's the homeland? These are fragments, little pieces of something much larger that came from the south. And that was before I knew anything about Nosen and Beck and all the paleomagnetic data then started, really we're thinking 1980, Merle 1976, but I was more attuned to the rocks, not paleomag. So that's kind of, I think, what got me focused on what was happening along the margin and where did this stuff come from.
Well, this is fascinating, and we did a whole interview with you in your backyard where you told more of this story. But for today's topic, a connection between themes involving Baja BC, pro or against, and this flat slab subduction model, pro or against. It's new for me to connect the Rocky Mountains to this narrative of Baja BC. At what point did you kind of realize there was a grander debate here, not just exotic terrains, but this Rocky Mountain development as well, and your relationship with Dickinson? Well,
it's interesting, and I want to credit Dickinson and Snyder with that paper, because there's a lot of work done in the Rocky Mountains. I mean, good classic papers in GSA Bulletin studying the Wind Rivers and the Bighorns. But I think what Bill and Walt did was say, let's look offshore. Let's look at what was happening in plate tectonic terms offshore and see if we can relate that to what's farther inland. So I really credit them with trying to make this offshore connection. I also have to tell a funny story. I remember Dickinson one time said, I think we were chatting, well, how did this flat slab actually cause the uplifts? And he said, well, this flat slab sort of tickled the base of the crust and made these uplifts. I mean, this is before people like Peter Bird tried to do geodynamic models. But truth be told, I didn't ever try to make a connection between Baja BC and what was happening inland, because flat slab is dogma. I mean, so I didn't try to do that.
And there's, just to follow this through just a little bit more. So it's very difficult, isn't it, to be a flat slab person and also easily imagine parts of Southern California ending up in British Columbia. Those are competing ideas.
I really think, I've thought a lot about this, and I think if you made a comment that do you accept the fact that exotic units have been added to North America? I mean, if you can do that, then you have to worry about how did they get there and where did they come from. And when I think about it all comes back in my mind to the paleomagnetic data. If you accept that they are correct, then I think I mentioned this, you have a traffic problem. You've got this huge thing somewhere along the coast, and excuse me, I'm getting sorry.
That's probably one of your 55 grad students. Yeah, go ahead.
You have to have consumed a plate to make the California triad, we say, the arc, the forearc, the Franciscan. Might have been oblique, it might have been head on, we don't know. And I think that to try to sneak a flat slab in there after the Sierra Nevada shut off about 80, or the way Jason Salibi wanted to do it with kind of a thing running in from Southern California, there's just a lot of traffic. And I also want to say that you've been very careful in this series to say, I don't worry about plates. I'm not going to go into plate. Which plate? A, B, C, D, resurrection. And I think that's extremely good advice, because we don't have the anomaly record, magnetic anomaly record, to really faithfully. So there were plates, and like I said, you've got insular terrain that had an arc on it. You've got the Sierra Nevada arc, and there are the paleomagnetic data. I flatly say, if you can't accept the paleomagnetic data, then you're not going to be able to. How should I say this? I think you're going to stick with a flat slab.
Yeah, yeah. Well, great job. We'll have you back on in future episodes, Darrell. You're the godfather of all this. All these workers we're talking about studied under you. So outstanding. I think we're going to bring Rob back in. Can we do this? Can we get all three of us on screen? Oh my God, we can. Oh my God.
Hey, Rob. Woo. On, Darrell.
So, viewers, you're still with us. We have 1,000 folks. It's a little bit after 10 o'clock local time. You have a chance now, and I'll I'll moderate a little bit here and pick certain questions for these guys, but you've heard their contributions today. What questions do you have? And I don't know, can you guys see the chat as well, or is it just me?
I can see it.
I can see them, but you might want to pick and choose, because they come pretty fast.
They do come fast. Okay, I'm going to freeze this one. Kyle Roth, regarding the 100 to 70 million year old time window, where would plutons form with flat slab subduction? And where would plutons form with the end load collision? So first of all, Rob, do we have plutons between 100 and 70 in your area?
No.
Okay. Darrell, so maybe throw out the window, the time window. I'm sorry, Kyle, I guess I'm taking your question and running with it a little bit. There are a bunch of these plutons that are happening in the time window we're talking about today. Rob, you touched on some magma coming up along a thrust fault, but
yep.
Are we viewing all those magmas as, I'll ask it this way, Rob, do you teach that most of these magmas are ultimately subduction related?
Yeah, what we're learning is that they seem to have emanated from the Idaho batholith. So that's the source, and then they get into the fold and thrust belt and migrate east. It's really interesting. And so places like the intrusions in the Anaconda-Pintler Wilderness, in the Flint Creek Range, in the Pioneer Mountains, in McCartney Mountain, I could go on and on, even the Boulder batholith. Yeah. All of these are considered to be magmas that were generated to the west and in the main area of subduction in the Idaho batholith region, and then propagated east along the fold and thrust belt, probably migrating along décollements and rising up ramps and then settling in along ramp flat transitions. The Boulder batholith is spectacularly bizarre. It's clearly flat, and it appears to be a transition intrusive rock into extrusive rock in place, so that it's literally the intrusive component of it is simply it's a big flow that came out onto the surface and crystallized intrusively at the bottom of that flow, and then it crystallized extrusively, if you will, at the top of that flow. And this is an idea that goes way back. It was discussed and proposed by folks like Mitch Reynolds and a bunch of other people way back in the 60s and 70s, and it's absolutely holding up. That intrusion is a big flat intrusion, and it was we have core complexes in Montana, and that thing was detached in Eocene time and slid from its origins to the west to its current position between Butte and Helena.
Well, that's on our list, that Eocene core complex thing. That's going to be a major theme for us.
Yeah, that's a big new area of research in Montana.
Cool. great concentration there. I was screwing around with the settings and I took you off screen, so sorry about that,
No,
Rob.
that's okay.
We'll stick with this for a while. Pat Miller, Darrell, you want to talk about Dickinson's idea? Pat wonders, is there a simple explanation for the change in subduction angles?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think, and I also go back to one thing, and Basil touched on this, but
Sure.
what profoundly influenced Dickinson and Snyder and the flat slab people is what's happening in South America that you can observe today. This is the Cornell group, I think, Terry Jordan and others that found that the slab, the Andean slab being subducted, I think in two segments, changes from steep to flatter, and that means there must be a rip in it, some kind of tear. And there are, the volcanoes are associated, active volcanoes, with the steeper parts. And even more interesting, when you look east in the gentler parts, that's where you see block uplifts, Laramide style block uplifts. So I think that was the basis for a lot of the thinking about how these Rocky Mountain Laramide, I mean the structural style, might be related to a flat slab. It's what we see in South America today. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why they change. I don't know why it changes. You know, why the dip of the slab changes. That's beyond my ken.
That's good. That's good. We're all just learning, you know. We say what we know and we don't speculate a whole lot. That's super great. How about this one, Rob? Mike asks, should we consider plutons and basement to be the same?
No. The basement here is unfortunately, again, an unfortunate term, but it's this rich, interesting period of time during the Archean and Paleoproterozoic of metamorphic rocks. And they've been overlooked, of course, because they're highly metamorphosed, and so people worked on stuff that was easy. Yeah. First, and now that we know everything, we're on to the Archean. Right. But all jokes aside, the Archean basement is incredibly interesting and has its own rich history of block collisions, of continental collisions, and amalgamation to build Laurentia. For example, a major area of research these days in the basement is the study of the collision of the Medicine Hat block with the Wyoming province or Wyoming block, which is called the Big Sky orogeny, which occurred at about 1.8 billion years ago. So it puts it into the early part of the Proterozoic. There's a metamorphic overprint from it. There's some intrusions associated from it in the Little Belt Mountains of central Montana. It's a cool story.
Nice.
Yeah.
Another one for you, Rob. Marbles Collector says, what kinds of rocks make up a suitable décommement label or layer? So what's a décommement number one, and then what kind of suitable rocks are typical for those structures?
Right. Well, I always tell my students, if you don't like the French, we call it a freedom plane. But that's for you old enough to know that we had a little tip with the French a while ago. But no, the Coleman is just simply an area of a relatively flat fault that carries a lot of rock above it. That in this case propagated from west to east, and it tends to be in units like shales, because shales are greasy, slick buggers that allow for flat faults to propagate. So let me give an example for those that know Montana geology. Yeah. Up in Glacier National Park, the belt rocks, of course, form they are resting above the Lewis thrust, right? And they form a big syncline that makes up the park. So if you've ever driven across the park, you go up the belt on one side of the park, and then you go back down the belt on the other side of the park going over Logan Pass. And that's because it's a big, broad syncline, and it's sitting above a big thrust fault called the Lewis Thrust, which is a big, flat décollement that rests above, at least out in the eastern part of the park, on Cretaceous shale.
Excellent. I love this. This is, yeah, Darrell.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to a question by Papagino. I don't know.
Oh, that's the one I was going to ask you. Nice.
What data is needed to prove either possibility? I'm going to cast it a little bit different and say what data could disprove one and show that it cannot be correct. And I'm going to go way out on a limb here and go back to the paleomagnetic data and say that in spite of repeated attempts by Butler, Dickinson, and others to explain the paleolatitudinal results that show these things, insular and superterranean and intermontane, came from the south, I know of not one study that has basically taken one that passes all the fold tests in paleomagnetic and said it's wrong, or something about true polar wander, or something happening in the Cretaceous that disproves all. You have to throw out all the paleomagnetic data from, late Jurassic right into the right through the Cretaceous. Now, if one study showed that all this stuff was wrong, then we'd have to really go back to square one and start thinking about, there's still exotic terrains. Where were they? But yeah. I say look for the crucial tests that will rule out one thing. Merle Beck says the data are incontrovertible. One incontrovertible data set for all the paleomagnetic from Cretaceous. Then we're back to, doesn't prove or disprove one or the other, but we've got to start again.
This is fun. Let's do a few more. This is dealer's choice. Either one of you can grab this one. Steve asks, are there any stitching plutons within the Sevier Style that can tie in the dates with the Baja BC discussion? That's an interesting question. Anybody want to comment on that? What are the dates of your plutons that are kind of stitching within the Sevier, Rob?
Yeah, they're typically running between 80-something to early 70s.
Okay, well, that's the timing of Baja BC, but I don't know, Darrell, if that's not the way to go. Like, you're not going to get an age of a stitching pluton in Montana to say something about Baja BC, or are you?
Well, you're always going to get into the debate about how did these plutons originate? For a long time, the Idaho batholith was thought to be just the northern. This is Bill Dickinson, northern Sierra Nevada, went right through Idaho and all the way into British Columbia. But now Basil and I think others say, well, wait a minute, that could be the bulk of the Idaho batholith could be due to crustal melting, not subduction related. The ones along the western side, the little narrow ones, yes. So I think knowing the age of a pluton, you've got to say what caused the melting that made the magmas that rose up to be a pluton.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be my answer.
In case I wasn't clear, on the chalkboard, the concept with the end load and the big hit is that you're creating some plutons inland of that big hit and maybe within the suture zone and maybe within insular by failing that slab and having a bunch of plutons coming up. And we've been working on that idea. I'm not trying to steer us in any direction, but we've been working on that idea of a bunch of magmas showing up after a major accretion event. And that's not a subduction story the way that I'm viewing it at the moment. We'll do a few more, and then I'm having a blast. Oh boy. You guys see anything you want to reply to?
Can I add something, Nick?
Sure.
Okay, so since you're moving forward into the Eocene,
Yeah.
I think the Eocene in Montana is absolutely crucial to understanding this question that we're having today over flat slab subduction.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Okay, and here's why. So the Eocene, after a bit of a hiatus, so there's Cretaceous, intrusive and extrusive rocks, right? The Slide Rock volcano out by Big Timber is a gigantic stratovolcano of Cretaceous age. So in Montana, not everything was just intrusive. There were actual stratovolcanoes as well. Then there's a hiatus.
Okay.
And by the time you get into the Eocene, all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose again, and you have major centers of intrusion and volcanism throughout Montana. The central Montana Alkalic Province, which are these weird rocks, shonkonite, cyanide, etc., that are rich in pyroxenes, but also rich in potassium feldspars and sodium feldspars. To the south, you have the Absaroka volcanics that make up, that are, the famous climbing localities and ice climbing localities outside of Bozeman, because they form waterfalls, and down in Yellowstone, of course. And these are major centers, again, of stratovolcanoes of Eocene age. And then the Dillon area, where we have the Dillon volcanics, the Lowland Creek volcanics, and the Chalice volcanics, which sneak in, the name sneaks in from Idaho into Montana. All right, here's the point. Don Hyman, who's the expert on central Montana Alkalic Province, in my view, has argued that lab studies show, in order to get rocks like shonkonite and cyanite and so on, that you need to have high pressure melting. And one of the ways to get it is to thicken the crust with flat slab subduction, which then causes greater pressure on the mantle out in the central Montana Alkalic Province to produce these weird magmas that you get in the central Montana Alkalic Province. In my area, where I've done some work, we see a transition from arc to extensional chemistries from the Eocene to the Miocene. And we have interpreted that as flat slab subduction falling away, and as it falls away, generating extension, and seeing then this transition from compressional volcanism and intrusions to extension. So the Dillon volcanics are dacite, andesites, dacites. And the younger rocks, like Black Butte in the Gravelly Range, a spectacular feature, is basalt. And so there's a lot of evidence in the Eocene that supports flat slab, the Farallon plate playing a role in Montana. And it has to be considered in all this, in my view.
Oh, okay, maybe we're not done with the Rockies. Come on now.
Not even close.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of evidence that's important to this story out here that needs to be incorporated.
Good.
We're just on the tip of this iceberg of learning about, these chemistries and how they might relate to, the different mechanisms of generation of these magmas.
That is a perfect transition to what we're going to be doing in the next few shows. So thank you for that. Darrell, any final thoughts, Darrell, before we sign off, at least this time with you?
No, it's been fun. Yeah. And I'm trying to watch chat and everything, but it's working really well, Nick. I think you've set the problem up really well, even if we can't solve it in the next minute.
That's right. That's right. So, yes, we've got Darrell and Rob. Darrell and Rob. All right. Thank you both for your time. Really appreciate it. And I'm gonna sign off with these guys one-on-one. So have a good day. Thank you for your time.
Good to see you, Darrell.
Yeah.
All right. All right, Darrell, I got to get rid of you here. How much?
That's all right. Yeah.
All right. Okay. See ya. Well, okay. I guess we still have 1,000. So the experiments continue with the technology. That was our first time, obviously, having 2 guests at once. I don't know if it worked. And I'll be curious to see if this left some kind of mark with you. I feel like I need to revisit what I was hoping to do with this show, just in case it's still a little bit unclear to you, and then we'll sign off. The main hope was that I could frame a discussion about flat slab subduction, an idea pushing 50 years old, and a new idea that not many people are paying much attention to. And I think there's enough here to continue to showcase that idea and revisit it occasionally. But you heard what Rob had to say. He's kind of still, what I'm hearing, I don't know how you heard it. I heard Rob maybe still kind of being here, like the majority opinion is. And once we get to the Chalice magmas and our Eocene volcanism happening so far inland, I guess maybe we'll come back to some of this. But I was hoping to at least set this up, and we'll keep referring to this, I think, as the shows continue. How about 3 more questions directly from you to moi, that's French, de comment, and then we'll do a toast to you. Anybody got anything they want to ask? I haven't used your document camera lately, Joe. I'm sorry. I'm out of ports with this new setup, and so I'm trying to figure out how to get back to that document camera. Mr. Tony, can you show a cross-section diagram again, trying to visualize? If you just mean this, that's how we'll finish. Thank you, Mr. Tony. So this one didn't feel scattered, even though it appears like it was scattered. But for me, I wasn't fighting the technology generally, and I felt like things were going well. But just to make sure, let me hit the main things one more time before we say goodbye. The Rocky Mountains are in here. They're not out here. This line here is the old west coast of North America. And Rob is straddling the boundary there in Dillon, Montana, between Sevier Style and Laramide Style. But it's this kind of discussion that we've been having today. Sevier Style, where we have these thrust sheets on low angle reverse faults. Laramide, which you can barely see, on steeper angle faults, more like further east in Wyoming and Colorado. And as Rob was pointing out, there's places like in his neighborhood where both are kind of happening and overlapping in time and space. Why is this happening? That was our question. When did it start? When did it finish? The model that's existed for a long time is a flat slab subduction model that we're going to kick this Rocky Mountain construction into overdrive when we continue to subduct the Farallon plate. But as we subduct it, we have it, what did Darrell say? Tickle. Dickinson said we're tickling the underbelly of the North American continental crust. Are we sure that's right? I know everybody's saying that. Are we sure that's right? Yeah, Dad. Yeah, I got it. So tickling, and we're creating this. And as soon as we pull this thing back down, then we kill the Rockies. In this model, there is no major exotic terrain coming in. In this model, there is no role of Baja, BC. And so Basil, Tikoff, and others are saying you cannot overlook the significance of a superterrain the size of Wrangellia and Friends, known as the insular superterrain, and the effect of docking that thing. Whether you want to dock this thing in Idaho and send it north, or you want to dock it in Mexico and send it north. The Rockies are a direct result of loading the end, or hitting, or kapowing the end of the North American continent 100 million years ago. And the Sevier and Laramide orogenies are a result of that collision. That's the end load discussion and narrative. Mr. Tony, I don't know if that's what you wanted, but that's what we did. Okay, a toast to you. Here's to our two guests today, Rob Thomas from University of Montana Dillon, or University of Montana Western, and to Darrel Cowan, the godfather of all the Baja BC workers from the University of Washington in the last 50 years. Here's to Darrel Cowan. And of course, here's a toast to you for your interest and your enthusiasm to learn some new things. In general, but specifically, geology here in the American West. Here's to you. And I'm seeing we got Jeff Tepper here, and we got all sorts of folks. So the geologists have discovered us. If you go way back with me, our live chat really didn't have geologists of different specializations, but they're on to us now. And so obviously things are a little different than it was back in March of 2020 with Bijou the cat and food props and everything else. Things are just kind of naturally evolving into a new style, speaking of structural styles. And looks like people are still interested, so I'll continue to go in this area. I'm having a blast. I'm just having a big old good time, and I hope that you are too. So here's to us. I did this before the show started, but let me go one more time to Patty the iPad. Oh God, we're up to 35 now in Ellensburg with snow. And I want to invite you to our next session, which will be the Eocene. We will be docking Silesia on Wednesday, December 8th at 2 p.m. Pacific time. Join us live or watch the replay, obviously, up to you. And then a look ahead. Happy to have you come by. Drop in for a visit if you like. Saturday and Sunday, the 11th and 12th. Wednesday, the 15th. Saturday and Sunday, the 18th and 19th. And then there will be a 2-week break for the holidays, and we will resume the alphabet after the first of the year. Thank you. I love you. And goodbye from Ellensburg, Washington, USA. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you Wednesday. $1,800 comments. What? Oh, good Lord. End stream. Thank you. I love you. Goodbye.